Prime Minister David Cameron is back in London, meeting intelligence and police chiefs to consider the UK's response to those terrorist attacks in Paris last week, in which 17 people died. Yesterday, more than 1.5 million people marched through the French capital as a show of unity. Whilst here in the capital, the Mayor Boris Johnson joined crowds who gathered in Trafalgar Square to demonstrate their support. Well, joining us now is Mark Gardner from the Community Security Trust, a charity which provides security for the Jewish community in London. Good morning to you, Mark.
Good morning.
And tell us about the feeling then, the reaction, of course, after that, after the deaths at the kosher supermarket in Paris.
I think there's a feeling of quite widespread concern. More than anything, though, there's just pain at what's happened in France. People in the Jewish community understand the meaning of terrorism. They understand the nature of the threat. They saw the attack on the Charlie Hebdo publication, and they knew what it meant. And then, when there was a subsequent attack, the taking of hostages in a Jewish store, that came as a shock, but I would say probably not as much of a surprise as it would have been to other people. We understand the importance of anti-Jewish hatred within jihadist ideology and terrorist targeting. Unfortunately, we've seen it many times before over the last few years, and that's exactly why we perform security across the Jewish community.
Now, there were reports yesterday, I think in the Mail on Sunday, about patrol cars out in force in North London, cars very similar to police vehicles with the name Shomrim, which is Hebrew, I think, for guards on the side. Is that an increase, or are those cars always out patrolling, Mark?
Yeah, that's a separate organisation.
Sure.
It's my own Community Security Trust, but I think it probably is a slight escalation from Shomrim, similar to the escalation that my own group, CST, we had foot patrols on it in quite a lot of neighbourhoods in Greater London and Greater Manchester, plus an increase Jewish communities across the UK over the Sabbath. So obviously Jewish security organisations are doing everything that they can to reassure the community that security measures are fully in place, because I stress there's no specific intelligence saying that any kind of threat against British Jews is imminent, but everybody can see the situation and everybody knows how serious it is right now.
Yes, so they may feel more anxious, you're saying, but in fact they're at the same risk as they were a week ago, 2 weeks ago.
In a strict sense, yes, but also in a more general sense, unfortunately, people here might be, in a perverse way, inspired to copy what they've seen occur in Paris.
In fact, there's a very moving piece in today's Times newspaper you may not have seen yet, Mark, by Melanie Phillips, and the headline is "Jews, not cartoonists, to Islam's real enemy." And Melanie goes on to say about the underreporting of attacks on the Jewish community by jihadists, by Muslims all across the world. She says, for example, in January 2006, a 23-year-old was kidnapped, tortured and murdered in Paris by Islamic radicals, a young Jewish man, and 4 people, including 3 children, were murdered back in 2012 at a Jewish school in Toulouse. So this has been going on, it's just that we've chosen not to report it in this country.
Well, I would distinguish, first of all, between jihadists and Muslims, just as I would distinguish between Nazis and Germans, or Nazis and normal people in this country. I think that's an important distinction. Also, when she talks about reporting, I presume she means relative under-reporting in the media, rather than reporting to Jewish security organisations like my own. We have hundreds of such reports of anti-Semitic actions, unfortunately, by fellow Muslim citizens.
Millions of people, though, around the world. I mean, there were thousands of people in Trafalgar Square, obviously a huge number of people in Paris, but also around the world, people taking part in these solidarity marches, these unity marches. Does that give you hope?
It most certainly does. Unfortunately, when those previous terrorist attacks occurred against French Jews, the reaction actually was, well, on the one hand, there were strong condemnations by French politicians and some others, but there was also then a wave of subsequent anti-Semitic attacks, all of which contributed to French Jews leaving the country in large numbers. Now, whether or not this national reaction in France helps to prevent a similar rise in anti-Semitic incidents remains to be seen. But I tell you, if there is the same phenomenon that occurs this time around over the next month, then I think we'll see that, okay, the marches, the demonstrations were very welcome, but the proof of the pudding is whether or not further anti-Semitic attacks now occur, as has happened, unfortunately, on previous occasions.
Would you have a view on the assertion by Kelvin Mackenzie in the Sun newspaper today, who talks about exactly what you've said, a number of people who've left France, Jewish people, because they were concerned about attacks, that France is fundamentally a far more anti-Semitic country generally amongst all population than this country?
I think it's wrong to characterise an entire country or an entire religion as being fundamentally anti-Semitic. What you can say, though, is that anti-Semitism as a political force, as a political movement, is something which has been far, far more important in French national history than it has, for example, in the British scenario.
Thank you for joining us, Mark Gardner there from the Community Security Trust, the charity which provides security for the Jewish community in London. It's now just gone 7:13.